Our validations, the most exciting thing that we've done so far, and the thing that I know you've all been waiting for. Yeah, this is going to be great. So we're going to have two sides going on to our validations. What are those sides, do you think? Yeah, so the server side and also the client side too, right? Let's make sure that our backend side is kind of tweaked slightly. I'll show you, there isn't a whole lot of a change we need to make in there. But what I've got open here is my city controller, where we have all of our logic for our different routes. And the two routes that we're concerned with, again, are going to be our create and our edit routes, right? So inside our create route, let's say that we get some kind of an error here. Right now, all we're doing is we're sending that error back to the client. However, we haven't really indicated to the client that something was wrong. Does anybody know how we could do that here? Has anyone gotten to validations yet? Negative. All right. So what we can do is we can add a status code to our response indicating something went wrong. Okay? So the way that we do that is I can just say res.status, and then inside this status, I can set some code for that. So 400, for instance. And what that's going to do for our client side is using Axios, right, to make these API calls. Axios will notice that the response to our call came back with a status of 400. That means something went wrong, which would then trigger it would trigger an error, essentially, unless we caught that error. Okay? So let's do the same thing also in our edit, which is somewhere down here, update, I should say. So if something went wrong, again, let's send back a status 400. Notice here how I can chain these guys. From our time with OOP, what does that mean if I could chain things together like that? Yeah, it means that calling this status method right here then returns the response again. It's like returning this in JavaScript, right? Which means that then I can still invoke this JSON function as well. What's that terminology again? Chaining? Okay. Yeah. So we're just chaining here. That's all we're doing. Okay. So now that this is all set on the back end, let's deal with the front end part, right? So back here in my city form, where are we? Open this guy up here. We're going to need to have some kind of reference to some errors, right? So let's create something up here. Const errors set errors. Oops. Use state. And then when I invoke use state, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass in an empty array, basically saying, like we don't have any errors to begin with. Okay. Now inside of our template, let's just map through those guys so that we have them showing up. So let's say up here I want to map through my errors. I can say errors.map, and then that's going to give me an error and then also an index. Okay? And then inside that, what I'm going to render out is just going to be like a p tag, and then I'll say whatever that error was. Okay, if I want to style it in some way, I can obviously do that as well, right? I could just say style equals an object inside here, and I could say color red, for instance, if I wanted it to stand out. What's the other thing I need to include here if I'm mapping through something? Key, right? So we can use that index again if we don't have anything else. I'm getting an error here. Why is that? Errors.map. Comma expected? Why is it saying that? Anyway, I'm not going to worry too much about this, but basically one thing that we have to be aware of is that our component needs to be wrapped with some type of thing, right? Either those little fragment tags or a div or something of the sort. So I'm just going to use these little fragment tags. And then I need to have a closing fragment over here. And then I can kind of move everything over one level. So that looks like that pretty much did it, right? Okay, cool. All right, now the question is going to be, how do we get the errors that come back from our back end and call that set errors function? Because right now, who has control over the submit handler? Who created the submit handler? Was it this component right here? This is the parent component, right? So it's going to be kind of tricky. I think we're going to have to make some adjustments to what we have right now. Because, and just like as an aside here, part of the reason why we're kind of running into this issue is because we've now componentized our city form, right? If we hadn't done that and we'd kind of kept them in their own little views like I had them originally, this wouldn't really be so much of an issue. Okay. All right, so I think what we're going to do, and let me close this city controller here. We're using this in a couple different places. We're using it in Edit City, and we're also using it in New City, right? Okay. So right now, what we're passing it down the line is this whole handle submit function. What if instead we pass it a function that basically returns this object right here, or this promise object right here? Does anyone see any issues with that? If I give it a function that will return a promise to me, then inside my city form component, I can actually do a .catch, right? Because I know that I've got a promise. So let's see how that might look. So if we're in, I'll start with the new city component here. And I'm gonna kind of change the name here. So I'm gonna say, we'll call this function, let's see, send API request. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in some data, and then I'm going to actually make this post request, right? So I'm going to say axios.post, grab all of this right here, and then instead of the form state, what am I going to pass to it? Data. Now, if I return that whole thing, what am I going to get from it? A promise, which means that then inside my city form component, I can actually do a .then and a .catch, right? Okay, so let me, I'm going to comment out this guy right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of passing in handle submit, I'm going to pass in send API request. Oops. And then that's going to be send API request. Okay. Which means, what do I need to change now? So now I'm passing to the city form something a little bit different, right? So I need to change my city form to accommodate that. And let me split this up a little bit for readability. So instead of handle submit, now we're taking in this thing called send API request. Okay? And then what I want to do is that when this thing is submitted, now I can create my submit handler inside my form component, which is kind of nice, right? I can say function handle submit, and what's that guy going to take in again? An event. What do I always want to do? Prevent that default. Okay. All right. The other thing that I want to do is I want to invoke this send API request function, right? What does that take in? Takes in some data. Okay. Okay, and that data is coming from our form state, right? So that's right there. I'm going to pass in the form state. Now, in my .then, let's say I know that I always want to navigate back to my cities route or something, right? Cities. Okay. Do I have my navigate function in here? Yes, I do. That's cool. All right. And then, what happened here? Whoops. I think I missed, yeah. So then I also want to have a .catch for an error situation, right? So let's say .catch. For right now, we're going to console.log, so that'll be fine. Okay. Anything else here? Does this part make sense to you guys, that we're now invoking a function that's going to send our API request and it's going to return us back a promise? I see some people nodding heads, but other people, I'm afraid, have now been lost. In the parent, yeah, so in the parent, I've created this function called send API request that's taking in a data object, right? And then I'm returning the result of calling this post function, which is going to be what? What's the result of calling the function? A promise. Exactly. So this function, when it's called, is going to return me a promise. So that way I can do .then, I can do my .catch. Okay. So let's give this a try real quick. See where we're at. So let's go to new city. Right, and I've got my console log open. Let's just try to enter a blank one. Okay. So you can see here that I actually got a bad request, right? Saying here it failed with a status code of 400. Where did that come from again? From our controller. Yeah, exactly, from our backend. Okay. So now the question is, well, how do I actually get this on screen? Because right now I'm mapping through my errors, but I haven't yet set them, right? So let's see how we can actually do something with them. Oops. So we got this error, and it's going to have some data attached to it. And if I go to my network tab here, let me submit that one more time and kind of open this up. This was our response, right? We got this errors object that had all these different things inside. It had name, population, image URL. Now, in order for us to fill in our errors array, what I need to do is I have to basically loop through this object. Okay? So let's work that out. So in here, instead of just console logging our error, let's do something with it. So we're going to take this error object, and then where the errors are going to be, I believe, are going to be in our response object. Let me double check here. Validations. Yeah. So you guys can see they're going to reside here inside our error.response.data. Okay? That's where we have to go find our errors. And this part's going to be a little bit tricky, so probably it's something that you guys are generally going to have to copy and paste a little bit and then tweak depending on the situation. Just a warning, unless you're really comfortable with how this whole thing works. Okay. So error.response.data is what we're looking for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array out of that whole thing. So I'm going to say const r equals, and the way that I can map through it is I can use something like this. I can create this little array that's empty, right? And then I can go for let, or actually we could say const key in error.response.data.errors. Here, let me close that out over there. Okay, this is going to create a sort of loop, right? Have you guys looped through objects at all? Anyone? Nobody's looped through an object? Yeah. So what this is doing essentially is that it allows us to loop through the object, and each thing is going to be a key in the object. Okay? And then what we're going to do with that key is we're going to push something into our errors array. So I'm going to say r.push, and then we'll say, yeah, we basically have to grab this whole thing, which kind of sucks. And then I have to say @key, and then I have to say .message. Okay, because each particular error is going to have a message, and if we look at it in the console, you can see if I click on name, it'll open up name, and you'll see there's actually the message that goes with that. This is the thing that I want to show the user, right? This is the thing that they need to see. Okay, so now that I've looped through my object and I've correctly gotten all of my messages into this array, what else do I need to do? Set errors, right? And then I'm just going to pass in that array that we just created, right? Cool. Now what else might I want to do if, like, let's say that my form already had some errors from before, but I'm handling a new submission. I should probably empty out that errors array before I even make that API request, right? So that the user doesn't think like, oh, I've still got errors here. So I'd come down here and I can just say set errors, oops, like that. Was there any questions about that? Like why am I doing this?
It doesn't. Oh, it's because it's attached.
Because we're using our back end to validate this stuff. We're not even doing any kind of front end validation. So the idea here is let's go ahead and empty out the errors array before we even send our API request. And then if something goes wrong, then we'll put those errors into the right? Yeah.
I guess that's just to handle if they're successful. Because if there's multiple errors, you just override each other. That's fine. It's the success portion that you want something to clear your errors before there's another request.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just empty them out. Let's assume that things are okay, and then once we know that they're not, then let's replace those errors, right? Okay, cool. So let's give this a shot. If I do this, then nothing happens. Why is that? Yeah, so my validations were fine. Let me log out our errors. Oops. Okay, so if we open up our console, let me clear this too. Yeah, that's actually not connected to any. That's because I use LastPass. But yeah, so we got our error here. Where's our console log here of errors? Anyone seeing that? Errors.map. So errors is just an empty array, and then I console logged it. Shouldn't we be seeing? Oh, there's our empty array right there. Oh, here we go. Much better. Okay, so now, what's that? I just reloaded the page. Didn't really change anything. So if I provide a name here, some name, then now my validations are only showing 2 errors, right? Or if I provide an image URL .com.
So, does the validations only work when you're inserting a value that has that? So let's say, I guess like the way I'm trying to phrase it is, I'm trying to insert an object that has an extra key.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to reject that because it just looks for those keys.
Right, and then if you kind of want to prevent a person from entering extra fields and such, you could be a little more explicit in how you're handling it on your back end. So you could say each field is, like rec.body. The name of that field. That way they wouldn't be able to kind of like slide something in there, Okay, so this part's working. Let's see if we can get errors working also on our edit city component, right? So what we need to change about this is, again, instead of passing in a handle submit, what are we going to pass in? The send API request function, which will then return a promise, right? So let's create that. So let's say send API request. And then that's just going to take in some data, right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to return this put request here. So we don't need our .then at all. Okay? And then I want to pass that down here. Instead of handle submit, let's pass in send API request equals API request. Okay? And then if we go back to our, let's try to edit something here. I'll edit San Francisco. Let's get rid of the name. There we go. Try to get rid of the image. Nice. All right, where's the excitement? I thought you guys would be like pumped about validations. It's just like, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, they're like kind of a little ways in our rearview mirror because we did all that stuff last week when we were setting up our back end. Do you have what? Yeah. Yeah, they will be on the exam.
Also,
Yeah,
so the key that we're using to access the response data errors, that's the key for the audience.
I believe it's the key of the field, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so this key is really just the field name. So it's grabbing that field's from the errors object, and then it's taking its message property, which is whatever the actual error message was.
Because my thought process was like, I guess, trying to align, like, if you were trying to align the errors against the input rather than on top. Because like keys
Yeah.
kind of like big here, so like there has to be some high key in whatever field.
Yeah, you could do that if you wanted it to be like a little bit fancier. The reason I'm not showing everyone that is because that's a little bit more involved, and it's just bound to confuse people.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
So for the purposes of what we're trying to do, I just want to make sure you guys can show your errors. But yeah, like, you know, if you're really looking for great user experience, it'd be nice to
Yeah.
align them to those inputs. I agree. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, in the const key and errors, can you explain to me again?
Oh, this part right here, line 24?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So what we're doing is we're creating a for loop, but rather than iterating through an array, which we're kind of used to doing, we're actually iterating through an object. Okay?
Object.
So const key means that for each iteration of this loop, I'm just calling a constant variable of key, and that's representing a key in my object. Okay? And then this is where I'm trying to loop through is my error.response.data.errors.
Which is, that's in your backend? It's located in your...
Well, it came from the back.
Yeah.
But now all of this stuff is happening on the front.
Okay.
Yeah. So you kind of have to sometimes examine what you got back from your API to see like what the structure was of the errors. Sometimes, I mean, like if it's MongoDB, it should generally be like this.
Okay, so errors return an object or array objects?
This is errors is an object right here. Yeah. Are you talking about this
Oh,
ERR?
no, the errors last.
This, yeah, that's an object too. Yeah.
Okay.
So then what we're pushing here is the errors at a specific key, which could be name, population, or image URL, right? And then the message that went along with that. That's the thing that we want to actually show the user.
So it's a whole point to bring that function into the form is to show the error message at the same page as before.
Yeah.
Right? That's a whole point of bringing that to that. Now, like, since does the like refactoring still work when you pass in like reuse the same form over and over?
Well, what do you mean? I am reusing it, right? I'm using it both in the edit and also in the create.
Oh, so it still works.
Yeah, I'm using it in both places.
Because you for the new function, that's what you.
Yeah, I have this new function called send API request that just simply returns the promise so that then I can do my .then and my .catch.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Are there any like built-in success messages, or do you just do that yourself? If not, error return success message or something.
I'm not like. What do you mean built-in success messages? You mean like something to just like show to the user or
Does
whatever?
it have a success object like an errors object, or do we have to customize a success?
Yeah, you can make that whatever you want. But again, like success messages are not really something that we're going to be testing you guys on.
Yeah, of course.
Usually the success would be like, okay, navigate to some other page, or whatever it is.
Because I would think like successfully updated or successfully created.
Mm. Yeah, so if we wanted to customize some things, how would we handle that? If we're doing like a city form component, how could we do that? Well, we could probably take something in as a prop that would allow us to kind of customize this form a little bit, right? Like I could take in a prop that said success message if I wanted it to vary based on whether it was an update or it was a create. That's doable, for sure. Yes.
Really quick, so the 400 error that you put inside your controller, is that just a random number that you decided to do, or is that like a legitimate...
No, the status code 400, I'll show you guys what that essentially means.
200.
So 400 is a bad request due to something that is perceived to be a client error. Malformed request syntax, invalid message framing, or deceptive
So
request
you can do
routing.
different ones if you really wanted to.
Mhm.
Depending
Yeah,
on
you
what-
can use different status codes depending on the situation. Yeah.
I thought it was just a random number.
No, not at all. But again, what that's doing though is it's telling Axios that something went wrong with this request. And that's what's triggering it to go into that catch block, right? Okay. So I think out of all of this stuff, probably this part is maybe the trickiest. You guys agree with me there? Well, yeah, it's in the platform. I mean, nobody's trying to hide it from you. I'm just saying. You just got to be a little careful sometimes when you're copying and pasting, because if you mess something up, it can be hard to debug sometimes. What's that? You're good at it. All right. All right.
I think it would help. You don't have to do it right now, but if you put one up in Mattermost with just everything, like kind of like I can already picture it, but like just with the API request above it, with the then and patch maybe underneath it, like with the handle submit, maybe it'll look better. While it's taking in the event and the fun state.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
you know, I meant to actually put something in Mattermost today. I guess I could just do it now with this. Yeah. Yeah, so again, what I really want to stress though is that you guys are not forced to put a form into one component and make it this neat. You could have a separate form on your edit page as you do on your create page. Nobody's gonna like dock you for that or make an issue out of it. This just allows us to sort of keep our logic more in one place, right? It makes it more React-like in the sense that we're creating a component that does one thing, and we can reuse it in different places.
One question still.
Yeah.
Isn't it React like native?
What's React Native?
Yeah.
It's a library that allows you to build phone applications using React. It's not exactly the same as the web kind, but there are a lot of similarities. So rather than using divs and forms and regular HTML elements, you would use something like, I think they have some different ones. One's called a view element that you could create. You could also create a text element. There are a bunch of other things that you can do. So, but in terms of how you write it, you would write the application in JavaScript. So it kind of like, in order for your application to run, it has to run across this bridge. There's some sort of interpreter that takes it from JavaScript onto the native platform, whether it be Android or iPhone. So that's what that is. And you guys can take a peek at that too if you have some extra time and just want to browse around on it. React Native is pretty cool. All right, any other questions before I let you guys go? I'll post this up on Mattermost because I'm feeling pretty generous. No, seriously. All right, for sure.